Red wine splashes violently across a crisp black server's uniform. Park Ji-hai stands over the woman with a cruel smirk on her face. She tilts her empty glass and watches the red liquid soak into the fabric. In this gold-leaf ballroom, the elite guests wait for the server to cry. They see a young black woman with no name and no power. They think she is just a background character in their expensive lives. They have no idea she is a ghost. She is a legendary operative who once dismantled global empires for breakfast. The server reaches into her pocket. She pulls out a handkerchief made of gold-threaded silk. It is encrusted with raw emeralds and is worth $50,000. This is a forbidden viper silk. She calmly dabs the wine from her black uniform with clinical precision. Across the table, the most feared Mafia boss in the Midwest drops his glass. Park Ji's face turns a ghostly, hollow white. He recognizes the ancient sigil on that cloth. It is the mark of a shadow organization that treats kings like pawns. The atmosphere shifts from a petty insult to a death warrant. The Mafia boss realizes he just invited his own executioner to dinner. Smash that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on more amazing video. Join our community and be the first to see our latest uploads. The golden chandeliers of the Park estate flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the mahogany dining table. Medina stood as still as a statue against the velvet-covered walls. Her black server's uniform was stiff, professional, and perfectly pressed. She had spent 3 long years perfecting this role. She was a shadow, a ghost, a woman who did not exist in any government database. To the elite people in this room, she was just an extension of the silverware. They did not look at her face. They did not care about her name. They saw a servant, a tool, a piece of furniture with a pulse. Rich men like the guests of the Park Syndicate do not look at waitresses. They believe their wealth makes them the only people who matter. This invisibility was Medina's greatest weapon. It kept her alive while the rest of her old world burned. It allowed her to watch the power players of Chicago's underworld without being noticed. The Park Syndicate was a legend built of blood and iron. They ruled the city with a cold, heartless grip. Medina knew their faces from files she was never supposed to see. She knew their habits, their weaknesses, and their sins. She stayed in the corners, silent and watchful. She was a professional phantom in a world of loud, violent monsters. Every time she refilled a glass, she was calculating. She mapped every exit in the room. She noted the bulge of every guard's holster under their expensive suits. She memorized the pulse points on every neck within her reach. This was not just a job for Medina. This was a tactical exercise. After years as a fixer, the most dangerous operative in the shadow world, she could not simply turn her brain off. She lived in a constant state of readiness. Her life now was quiet. She lived in a small apartment. She looked after her secrets. She was safe as long as she remained nobody. But the air in the ballroom felt heavy tonight. The scent of expensive cigars and aged scotch could not hide the smell of tension. The Park family was celebrating, but Medina could see the cracks in their foundation. She watched the way the guards shifted their weight. She noticed the way the inner circle glanced at the doors. Something was coming, and Medina's instincts were screaming. She told herself to stay calm. She told herself to keep her head down. If she could just survive this shift, she could go back to her quiet life. But in the world of the Mafia, quiet lives are a luxury that few people can afford for long. She adjusted the tray in her hand, her eyes scanning the room one more time. The man at the head of the table, Park Ji-hu, looked like a king, but Medina saw the sweat on his upper lip. Even kings are afraid of the dark when they know what hides in it. She moved forward to clear a plate, her steps light and rhythmic, blending into the hum of the party like a heartbeat. The silence of the room was broken by the sharp, mocking laugh of Park Ji-hai. The Mafia boss's sister was dressed in a red silk gown that looked like a fresh wound against the dark wood. She was bored, and bored women in this world are often the most dangerous. Ji-hai's eyes locked onto Medina. There was no reason for the cruelty that followed. It was not a mistake. It was simply because Ji-hai felt superior. She wanted to remind everyone in the room who held the power. She wanted to see someone beneath her suffer for her entertainment. With a slow, deliberate flick of her wrist, Ji-hai tipped her crystal glass. A heavy wave of dark red wine crashed against Medina's black vest. It was a direct hit. The liquid soaked through the fabric instantly. It felt cold and sticky against Medina's skin. The socialite did not apologize. She did not even pretend it was an accident. She just smirked and waited for the server to break. She wanted to see that nobody begged for forgiveness for being in the way of her wine. She wanted tears. She wanted a scene that would make her feel like a queen. The guests paused. The clinking of silverware stopped. Everyone looked at the black server in the stained uniform. They expected her to scramble for a napkin. They expected her to apologize and run away in shame. But Medina did not flinch. Her expression did not change. Her heart rate did not skip a single beat. She stood her ground with a dignity that made the wealthy guests uncomfortable. She reached into her hidden inner pocket. Every eye in the room followed her hand. They expected her to pull out a cheap, white rag from the kitchen. Instead, she withdrew a handkerchief made of gold-threaded silk. It was heavy and beautiful. It was encrusted with raw, glowing emeralds that caught the light of the chandeliers. This was the viper silk. It was a token of an organization so secret and so lethal that even kings spoke of it in whispers. It was an artifact worth $50,000, and Medina was using it to clean a wine stain. She began to dab the dark liquid from her black uniform with the clinical precision of a surgeon. The silence in the room became absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb explodes. The guests realized they were looking at something they could not explain. The help was carrying a fortune in her pocket, and she was handling it like it was nothing. Medina focused on the stain, ignoring the gas around her. She knew this act was a flare in the dark. It was a signal that her life as a ghost was over. But she would not be humiliated by a girl in a red dress. She would show them exactly who was in control of this room, even if it cost her everything she had built. Across the table, Park Ji-hoo froze. The most feared Mafia boss in the Midwest felt the color drain from his face. His hand shook, and his own wine glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the floor, but he did not even blink. He did not look at the broken glass or the wasted wine. He stared at the emeralds in Medina's hand. His breath hitched in his chest. He recognized that sigil. He knew the history of the gold thread. He knew that only one person in the entire world carried that cloth, the legendary Reaper. The Reaper was a ghost story used to frighten young mobsters. She was the one who disappeared years ago after dismantling an entire criminal empire in a single night. Ji-hoo stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He ordered everyone out of the room. His sister started to protest, her face red with anger, but he barked a single command that made her turn pale. When the heavy doors finally slammed shut, he was alone with Medina. He did not reach for his gun. He did not call his guards. He looked at Medina with pure, unadulterated terror. He led her into his private study, a room filled with old books and the scent of expensive tobacco. He closed the door and locked it. "I thought you were dead," he whispered. His voice was a ragged shadow of its usual strength. The word in the shadows was that you were eliminated. They said there was nothing left but a memory. Medina did not answer. She stood in the center of the room, her stained black uniform a stark contrast to the luxury around her. She allowed the silence to grow. She knew that silence was the best way to make a man like Ji-hoo talk. He realized then that the woman he had hired to serve appetizers was the most dangerous person he had ever met. He was a dragon in the streets of Chicago, but in front of a Reaper, he was just a man. He realized his entire empire was suddenly standing on the edge of a razor. If Medina was here, it meant the old world was waking up. It meant the secrets he had buried were no longer safe. He wiped sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting toward the security monitors. He wasn't the boss anymore. He was a petitioner, and he was terrified of what the Reaper might demand in exchange for his life. He reached for a carafe of water, his hand trembling so much the glass rattled against the tray. He finally looked her in the eyes, searching for a spark of mercy. He found only the cold, hard reflection of a woman who had lived 1,000 lives and ended most of them. Ji-hoo did not ask why Medina was hiding. He knew that ghosts have their reasons. He knew that if a Reaper wanted to be a waitress, the world let her. Instead, He walked to his heavy oak desk with shaking hands. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and a small photograph. He handed them to Medina. His fingers brushed hers, and he flinched at the coldness of her touch. "My son, Leo, was taken 3 nights ago," he said. His voice was broken. "He is only 6 years old." The photograph showed a small boy with messy hair. He was tied to a wooden chair in a dark, concrete room. Medina looked at the image and felt a cold, familiar chill. She looked past the boy and studied the background. She looked at the way the knots were tied. In the corner of the photograph, there was a mark drawn in dark red. It was a specific geometric pattern, a ghost protocol mark. It was Medina's own old signature. It was a code she had used to leave at her mission sites to let the world know the fixer had been there. The kidnappers had not just taken the boy. They had left a message specifically for her. They had bypassed the estate's $1 million security system. They had moved past 30 armed guards without tripping a single alarm. Only someone trained in Medina's own secret shadow techniques could have done this. This was not a simple kidnapping for money. This was a professional challenge. It was a ghost calling out to another ghost. The Mafia boss was not just facing a rival gang. He was caught in the middle of a war between 2 shadows. Medina felt the weight of her past crashing down on her. She had tried to be normal. She had tried to be invisible. But the mark in the photo proved that the world would not let her go. Someone had found her. Someone knew she was at the Park Estate. They were using an innocent child to force her hand. They knew that Medina, despite her cold exterior, could not ignore her own signature. The ransom note was not for Jihu. It was for her. It was a summons back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. She traced the lines of the symbol with her thumb, remembering the night she had first drawn it. It was a mark of death, but tonight it was a map to a child. She looked up at Jihu, her eyes sharper than any blade he owned. The game had begun, and she knew the first move was hers. Jihu fell to his knees on the expensive rug. He was the head of the park syndicate, but right now he was just a father. He begged Medina to use her skills to find his son. "I will give you anything you want," he promised. "I can give you $10 million. I can give you a new identity in any country. I can give you an army of protection." Medina looked down at him with cold, uncaring eyes. Her face was a mask of iron. "I am retired, Jihu," she said. Her voice was flat. "Your wars are not my wars. Your son is not my problem." She turned to walk toward the door. She was ready to vanish. She could leave tonight, find a new name, and start over in a different city. She did not care about the Mafia or their power struggles. She had seen enough blood to last 10 lifetimes. But as her hand touched the door handle, she looked at the ransom note one last time. She saw a small detail in the handwriting that she had missed. It was a specific, jagged slant on the letter M. It was a habit of the man who betrayed her and tried to kill her years ago. She realized then that she could not run. If this man was alive, he would never stop hunting her. He had tracked her to this house. He had studied her life. If she disappeared now, he would just find the next place she hid. He would keep killing until she faced him. She was not safe. She was being stalked by a predator who knew all her moves. She realized that her former enemies had finally arrived to finish the job. She turned back to the Mafia boss. He was still on the floor, looking at her with desperate hope. Medina's eyes were like ice. "I will not help you for your money, Jihu," she said, "and I do not need your protection." She walked back to the desk and picked up the photograph. "I will help you because the man who took your son is a man I thought I killed 5 years ago. This time, I'm going to make sure he stays dead." An unwilling alliance was born in the shadows of the study. The Reaper and the Dragon were now on the same side, and Chicago was about to find out what happens when a ghost stops hiding. She took a deep breath, feeling the old power returning to her limbs. The server was gone. The fixer had returned. She looked at Jihu and told him to stand up. They had work to do and blood to spill. Medina stood in the center of the boy's bedroom, her eyes moving with the cold precision of a high-powered scanner. She did not see the stuffed animals or the colorful posters on the walls. She saw angles of entry and the microscopic scuffs on the floorboards. Park Ji-hoo stood by the door, his presence heavy and suffocating. He wanted answers, but Medina needed silence to think. She knelt by the window, examining the lock. There were no scratches from a pick and no signs of a forced bypass. The alarm system had been disarmed using a primary administrative code, not a bypass hack. This realization made the air in the room feel even colder than the Chicago night outside. She moved to the computer desk and pulled a small ultraviolet light from her tactical kit. She swept the beam over the keyboard and the light switches. Most of the fingerprints were small and belonged to the boy, but one set of prints on the window latch was larger and familiar. Medina's mind flipped through thousands of stored files from her days as a fixer. She recognized the pressure pattern of the grip. It was a signature of the Park family's own inner circle. Someone with high-level clearance had walked into this room, picked up the child, and walked out the front door. The security guards hadn't seen an intruder because there wasn't one. They had seen a family member. "Your enemy isn't hiding in a warehouse across town, Ji-hoo," Medina said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She stood up and turned to face the Mafia boss, the UV light still glowing in her hand. The Ghost Protocol was used to cover the tracks, but the door was open from the inside. Whoever did this knew the rotation of your guards and the master override for the nursery. Jiu's face twisted into a mask of disbelief and rage. He began to name his captains, his lieutenants, and his rivals, but Medina shook her head. She pointed to a small, discarded earring she had found wedged behind a nightstand. It was a ruby stud, identical to the one Park Ji-hye had been wearing at dinner before the wine was spilled. The betrayal was not a corporate move or a tactical strike from a rival syndicate. It was a family betrayal. Medina explained that the wine incident at the gala was more than just a distraction. It was a test to see if Medina was still sharp enough to notice a threat. Ji-hye had used the chaos of the spilled wine to slip away and finalize the handoff of the boy. Ji-hoo slammed his fist into the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent nursery. He realized that his own blood had sold his legacy for a price. Medina watched him, her face like stone. She knew that in the Mafia, a traitor in the family was a death sentence for everyone involved. Medina did not believe in coincidences, and she did not believe in simple malice. She knew that every betrayal had a balance sheet. While Ji-hoo was ready to tear the estate apart, Medina went to Ji-hye's private quarters. She bypassed the electronic lock in seconds, stepping into a room that smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. She didn't look at the jewelry or the designer clothes. She went straight to the vanity and found a hidden compartment behind the mirror. Inside was a burner phone and a stack of overdue notices from an offshore gambling site. The numbers were staggering. Ji-hye didn't just have a hobby. She had a debt that could swallow a small country. The messages on the burner phone told the whole story. Ji-hye had been losing millions in high-stakes underground poker games run by a rival syndicate known as the Iron Lotus. They had squeezed her until she broke. They didn't want the money they knew she didn't have. They wanted a way to hurt Ji-hoo. They had offered to wipe her debt clean in exchange for the boy. Medina read the last message sent an hour before the gala. It was an address for a drop-off point and a confirmation that the ghost would be there to handle the child. The Iron Lotus wasn't just working alone. They had hired someone who knew Medina's old methods to make the kidnapping look like her work. Medina walked back to the study and tossed the burner phone onto the desk in front of Ji-hoo. He read the messages, his eyes widening as he saw his sister's handwriting in the saved drafts. The realization that his nephew had been used as a bargaining chip for gambling debts made him sick. "She sold him," Ji-hoo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "She sold my son to the Lotus." Medina leaned over the desk, her eyes locking onto his. "She didn't just sell him. She gave him a roadmap to your heart. And she gave my location to a man who has been waiting 5 years to kill me. The debt was a motive, but the prize was the boy's life." Medina explained that the Iron Lotus was likely holding Leo at a secondary location to ensure the debt was settled and the Park Syndicate was neutralized. Ji-hye had been a puppet, but the strings were being pulled by a master of the shadow world. Medina told Ji-hoo that they couldn't just arrest his sister. They needed to use her. They needed to make the Lotus think the deal was still going smoothly. Every minute they spent arguing was a minute Leo spent in a cage. Medina's old instincts were fully awake now. She wasn't just a server anymore. She was a hunter, and the scent of the traitor was lead-heavy in the air. To find the boy, they had to go where the debt was born. Medina stripped off her tactical gear and put on a backless black evening gown that had a ceramic blade against her thigh. Jihu traded his boss's suit for the rougher look of a high-rolling gambler. They headed to the Den, an illegal, subterranean casino hidden beneath a meat-packing plant on the edge of the city. The air was thick with the smell of blood, sawdust, and expensive tobacco. This was the territory of the Iron Lotus. It was a place where fortunes were lost in a single hand, and people disappeared between the shadows of the card tables. Medina moved through the crowded room with the grace of a predator. She was no longer the invisible server. She was a mysterious woman on the arm of a desperate man. Her eyes scanned the room, identifying the pit bosses, who were actually armed enforcers. She watched the dealer's hands and the way the money moved. Jihu played his part perfectly, acting like a man on a losing streak, drawing the attention of the floor managers. While he distracted the guard with a loud argument over a lost bet, Medina slipped into the back hallway. She used a small electronic sniffer to intercept the casino's internal Wi-Fi signal, searching for any mention of the boy or the ghost. She found what she was looking for in a series of encrypted voice memos on the casino manager's private server. The boy was being moved to a warehouse at the docks, but the special guest had already arrived to oversee the final stage of the plan. Medina felt a cold shiver go down her spine when she heard the voice in the recording. It was a voice she hadn't heard since the explosion in Singapore. It was Marcus. He was the one who had cleared Jihai's debts. He was the one who had taught the Iron Lotus how to mimic the Ghost Protocol. He wasn't just working for the Lotus. He was using their resources to build a stage for his final revenge against Medina. She signaled to Jihu, and they made their exit before the guards could get suspicious. Back in the car, the air was tense. Jihu looked at Medina, noticing the way her jaw was set. "You know him, don't you?" he asked. Medina nodded slowly. "He was my student. I taught him how to disappear, how to kill, and how to stay hidden. I thought I killed him when I destroyed our old headquarters." She realized now that Marcus had been planning this for years. He had found the one thing that would draw her out of hiding, a crime so close to her own style that she couldn't ignore it. The underbelly of the city was a dark mirror of her past, and she was finally stepping back into it. The warehouse at the dock sat like a rotting tooth against the dark Chicago skyline. Medina stood on a nearby rooftop, looking through a pair of high-powered binoculars. She saw the guards circling the perimeter, but she also saw the traps Marcus had set. He had placed snipers in positions that Medina herself would have chosen. He had set up tripwires at the exact height she used in her own training. It was like looking into a mirror of her own tactical mind. Marcus wasn't just defending a location. He was showing her that he knew every move she would make before she even thought of it. "He's waiting for me," Medina told Jihu as they huddled in the back of a tactical van. "He's left a gap in security on the east side. It looks like a mistake, but it's a kill zone. He wants me to enter there, because that's what I taught him to look for." Jihu looked at the thermal map of the building. He saw his son's heat signature in a small room on the third floor. He wanted to storm the building with 50 men, but Medina stopped him. "If you move your men in now, Marcus will trigger the fail-safes. The building is likely rigged with explosives. He wants a grand finale. Jihu, he wants to go out in a blaze of glory, and he'll take your son with him." Medina realized that to beat Marcus, she had to stop being his teacher and start being his enemy. She had to do something she would never have taught him. She had to be unpredictable. She decided to use Jihu's men as a loud, violent distraction while she entered through the one place Marcus would never expect, the heavily guarded front gate. It was a move of pure suicide for anyone else, but for Medina, it was the only way to break his rhythm. She looked at Jihu and saw the fear in his eyes. He was a man who ruled with fear, but now he was tasting it himself. He handed her a communicator and a master key to the warehouse. "Bring him back," he pleaded. Medina checked her weapons one last time. She felt the weight of the $50,000 handkerchief in her pocket. It was more than a status symbol now. It was a promise. She had been a ghost for too long, hiding from the shadows she had created. Marcus was her mirror image, the dark part of her soul that she had tried to leave behind. To save the boy, she had to face that mirror and break it. She stepped out of the van and into the shadows, moving with a terrifying speed. The teacher was going to meet the student, and only one of them would walk out of the docks alive. The night exploded into a symphony of gunfire and shattered glass. Jiwoo's men launched a frontal assault on the south side of the warehouse, creating a wall of noise and fire. As Marcus's snipers turned their attention to distraction, Medina moved. She didn't sneak. She sprinted toward the main entrance, using the chaos as her cover. She moved with a rhythmic, lethal grace, neutralizing 3 guards before they could even raise their rifles. Her movements were a blur of black fabric and suppressed muzzle flashes. This was a silent infiltration she was famous for. A breach so fast and so quiet that the enemy didn't know they were dead until they hit the ground. She entered the warehouse through a side loading bay, her eyes adjusting instantly to the dim light. She bypassed the laser grids by moving through the blind spots she had identified from the rooftop. Every step was a calculated risk. She found a ventilation shaft and climbed upward, her breath steady and her mind clear. She could hear Marcus's voice over the internal intercom, mocking the men outside, still believing Medina was trying to sneak into the East Kill Zone. He was arrogant, and arrogance was the one thing Medina had never taught him. She reached the 3rd floor and dropped silently into the hallway, just outside the room, where Leo was being held. The hallway was lined with automated turrets and pressure plates. Medina used a specialized jammer to freeze the sensors, her fingers moving with the speed of a concert pianist. She reached the door and used the master key Jiwoo had given her. Inside, the room was small and smelled of salt air. Leo sat in a chair, his eyes wide with terror, but his mouth was taped shut. Medina moved him, her heart softening for a split second as she saw the boy's fear. She cut the zip ties on his wrists and pulled the tape from his mouth. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. "I'm taking you home." But as she turned to lead the boy out, the lights in the room flashed red. A heavy steel door slammed shut over the exit, locking them inside. A screen on the wall flickered to life, and Marcus's scarred face appeared, his one good eye gleaming with a twisted joy. "I knew you'd come for the gate, Medina," he sneered. "I taught you to be unpredictable, remember? I just didn't tell you that I learned how to predict that, too." The floor beneath them began to vibrate, and Medina realized the room was a pressurized elevator designed to drop them into the harbor. The tactical breach had turned into a cage, and the final confrontation was no longer a choice. It was a trap. The steel elevator car jerked and groaned as it moved. It began its slow, steady descent into the dark harbor waters below the warehouse. Medina looked at the digital control panel on the wall. She realized the lock was a masterpiece of high-level encryption. It was a Viper-level deadbolt system. This was a specific security layer she had helped design many years ago for Council. To save Leo, she needed to master override codes immediately. These codes were locked deep inside her old agency's central vault. But using those codes was a death sentence for her secret, quiet life. The moment she sent the request, every shadow agency in the world would see a signal. They would know the legendary Fixer was still alive and active in Chicago. It was the ultimate price for a single life. She looked at the boy. He was trembling with fear, his small hands clutching his knees. She pulled a high-frequency transmitter from her tactical belt. Her fingers moved quickly across the small, glowing screen. Her mind was heavy with the weight of her choice. She was trading her freedom for a child's heartbeat. She synced the device to a nearby military satellite in orbit. She entered her old biometric signature and her secret voice key. The screen flashed a bright, alarming warning. Recognition confirmed. The master codes flooded her screen just as the elevator reached the bottom of its long track. The doors hissed open with a puff of cold air. But Medina knew she had just put a target back on her own head. She had saved the boy, but she had ended her peace forever. She stepped out into the damp, salty air of the sub-basement. She knew Marcus was waiting for her, in the dark. The hallway was lit by dim, flickering bulbs that hummed. Medina kept Leo very close to her side. She could feel his small, shaky hand gripping her tactical vest. She checked every single corner before moving an inch. She was back in the violent world she had tried to burn down. The Viper network was now tracking her every move in real time. They would send specialized teams to collect her very soon. They would want their most valuable asset back in the fold. She looked at the exit at the far end of the tunnel. Beyond that heavy door was a harbor. Beyond that door was Marcus. She had given up her ghost life for this one moment. She had no more secrets left to hide from the world. She was a fixer again. She adjusted her grip on her suppressed weapon. She was ready to face the consequences of being seen by her old masters. She led Leo toward the light at the end of the tunnel. She felt the weight of the emerald handkerchief in her pocket. It felt like a heavy anchor to her past. She told Leo to stay low and move when she moved. The boy nodded, his eyes wide and trusting. Medina knew she could not fail him now. The cost of the codes was high, but the cost of his life would be higher. She reached the end of the hall and placed her hand on the cold metal handle of the final door. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. This was the end of the server and the start of the Reaper. She pushed the door open, ready to meet the monster she had created. The harbor wind hit her face, smelling of salt and old machinery. The game was in its final stage. The elevator doors opened to a sub-basement at water level. The air was thick with the heavy smell of salt and diesel fuel. Marcus stood at the end of the narrow wooden pier. He was silhouetted by the cold, pale moonlight hitting the waves. He held a black detonator in his left hand. He had a loaded flare gun in his right hand. He smiled widely when he saw Medina walking out with Leo. "You used the codes," Marcus shouted over the sound of wind. "You just told the ghost exactly where to find you. Was one brat worth the end of your quiet life, Medina?" He stepped closer to the edge. His finger hovered over the big red button. This button would sink the entire warehouse into the harbor instantly. He wanted her to feel the crushing weight of her choice. Medina stood her ground on the wet wood. She kept Leo safely behind her legs. She had a very hard choice to make right now. She could draw her weapon and try to kill Marcus, but the explosion might take the boy down with him. Or she could step into the light and offer herself as a trade. Marcus wanted a final, grand show. He wanted to prove he was better than the woman who had trained him. He demanded that she drop her gun and walk toward him. Medina looked down at Leo's terrified, tear-streaked face. She thought about her 3 years of hiding in silence. She thought about the simple life she had almost enjoyed. Then she slowly dropped her pistol into the dark, cold water. She chose the child's safety over her own survival. Marcus laughed loudly as the gun disappeared beneath the dark surface with a splash. He felt like he had finally won the long game. He motioned for his armed men to move in closer. The great fixer reduced to a common nanny. He sneered at her. He beckoned her forward with the tip of the flare gun. Medina walked slowly with her hands raised high. She was calculating every single second in her head. She was looking for the one opening she needed to strike. Leo watched her with wide, confused eyes. He did not understand the heavy sacrifice she was making. He only knew that the lady in black was the only thing keeping him alive tonight. The pier groaned under the weight of the rising tide. The tension in the air was at its breaking point. Marcus was distracted by his own massive ego and his victory. He did not see the subtle shift in Medina's tactical stance. He thought she was defeated and broken. He was very wrong about her. Medina knew that a weapon was just a tool, and she was the real weapon. She watched his thumb on the detonator. She watched the way he held the flare gun. She was waiting for the exact moment the wind changed. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of a boat engine. Help was close, but not close enough. She had to bridge the gap herself. She looked Marcus in his one good eye and saw the madness there. He didn't want the boy. He didn't even want the money. He wanted to see the legend fall. Medina tightened her muscles, preparing for a leap that seemed impossible. She was a ghost, and ghosts don't stay down for long. Marcus raised the bright flare gun high, but he did not aim it at Medina. He suddenly aimed it at Leo. He wanted to destroy the one thing Medina had sacrificed her identity to save. He pulled the trigger just as a heavy, thunderous crash sounded from the ceiling. Park Ji-hoo had finally breached the room from the floor above. In that chaotic, fast second, Medina did not reach for a hidden weapon. She threw her own body directly in front of the small boy. The heavy round meant for the child tore through Medina's left shoulder. The massive force spun her around like a toy. She collapsed onto wet, rotting wood pier. Her black uniform quickly turned a much darker, wetter shade of red. She did not scream out in pain. She only held the boy closer to her chest. Ji-hoo watched in total silent shock as the legendary Reaper acted as a human shield. He had heard many terrifying stories of her cold heart, but he saw the absolute truth in her warm blood. He opened fire on Marcus with his own weapon. His fatherly rage fueled his aim until the traitor fell back into the dark, churning water. Ji-hoo ran across the pier to Medina. He ignored the thick smoke and the rising heat of the fires. He saw the deep wound on her shoulder. He saw the way she still gripped the boy's hand to comfort him. He realized then that the monster from the old stories was actually a woman of great honor. She had paid a debt she did not even owe to him. He picked up his son with one strong arm. He helped Medina up with the other arm. He saw the intense pain in her eyes, but she did not complain. They moved quickly toward the exit as the building began to groan and shake. The structural damage from the breach was too much for the old warehouse. Ji-hoo's men provided heavy cover fire as they reached the armored SUVs waiting outside. Medina was fading very fast now. Her breath was coming in short, shallow gasps that hurt to hear. But she refused to let go of Leo until they were safely inside the car. Ji-hoo looked at her with a look of profound, lifelong debt. He had seen many people die for money or for power. He had never seen someone die for a stranger's child. He barked loud orders to his private medical team. He told them that if she died, they would all be in great trouble. He held her cold hand as the sirens began to wail loudly in the distance. The dragon owed a debt that all his money could never truly pay. He promised her over and over that she would live to see the sun. The car sped through the streets of Chicago, ignoring every red light. Leo sat in the back, silent and safe, watching the woman who had saved him twice. Medina looked out the window at the passing lights. She felt the coldness spreading, but she also felt a strange peace. She had done it. The boy was alive. The debt was paid. Her past was catching up, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She closed her eyes as the medics started to work on her. The aftermath of the night was a whirlwind of fire, smoke, and cold justice. While Medina was treated by a private doctor in a secret wing, Ji-hoo turned his attention back to his own family. The betrayal by his own sister, Jae, could not go unpunished. Medina watched in the shadows of a high balcony as the park syndicate underwent a brutal cleaning. Ji-hoo stripped his sister of all her wealth and her expensive jewelry. He took away her famous name and her high status. He did not kill her, though many expected him to. He did something much worse to her. He exiled her to the very poor streets she had looked down upon. She was left with nothing but her massive gambling debts. She was now the invisible one. She was a nobody. It was a cold, perfect kind of justice. The rival Iron Lotus Syndicate was dismantled in a single bloody night. Ji-hoo's best and most loyal soldiers led the strikes across the city. They used the tactical intel Medina had gathered at the illegal gambling den. Every single traitor within the park ranks was hunted down. They were removed without any mercy or hesitation. Medina sat in the quiet study. Her $50,000 handkerchief was resting on the mahogany table beside her. It was stained with her own dried blood now, but it no longer felt like a heavy burden to her. The blood cleaning was finally complete. The Park family was secure once more in their home. The legend of the server who stopped a Mafia war began to spread through the city. The underworld knew a Reaper was watching them from the dark. They were afraid to make a move. Ji-hoo visited her every single day during her long recovery. He did not talk about business or money. He talked about Leo. He talked about how the boy asked for her every single morning at breakfast. Medina listened with her face still as a mask of calm. But the walls she had built around her heart were different now. She had let someone in. She had allowed herself to be seen by a real family. The syndicate was quiet. The streets were still, but the power dynamic had shifted forever. Jihu knew that his entire empire existed only because a ghost had chosen to save it. He spent millions of dollars to erase the digital footprints she had left when using the secret codes. He worked hard to bury the fixer once more. He wanted to give her back the piece she had traded away for his son. He brought her the best food and the finest clothes. He treated her like royalty, but Medina only wanted the quiet. She watched the gardeners from her window. She saw Leo playing in the yard with his dogs. This was the result of her work. The blood had been cleaned, and the world was right again. But she knew that the Viper would not forget. She knew that her old life was still out there, searching for signal. She had to be ready. She started her physical therapy with a focus that scared the doctors. She pushed herself until she could hold a weapon again. She was cleaning her own blood now, preparing for the next shadow to fall. 1 full week later, Jihu met Medina at a large private estate. It was located on the far outskirts of Chicago. It was a fortress disguised as a luxury modern home. It was built with the same Ghost Protocol security she had once designed for kings. He handed her a thick, black leather envelope. Inside were 3 brand-new passports and the land deeds to the house. There was also a bank account that would last 3 full lifetimes. "The world knows the fixer is alive," Jihu said. His voice was very soft and respectful. "But they don't know who this woman is. This place is yours. No one gets in without your permission, not even me." He was giving her a truly clean life. He was giving her a real home. Medina looked at the heavy brass keys. She looked at the beautiful sunrise over the green trees. For the first time in 10 long years, she did not feel like a ghost hiding in the dark. She felt like a person standing in the warm light. Jihu bowed low to her. This was a rare gesture of submission from a man who bowed to no one else. He acknowledged that some ghosts deserved to live in peace. Medina watched him drive away in his car. Her hand rested on the gemstone-encrusted silk in her pocket. She had lost her anonymity to the world, but she had finally found her humanity. She walked into her new home and locked the door behind her. She was ready to start a story where she was finally the master of her own fate. The server was gone. The fixer was gone. Only Medina remained. She stood by the large window of her new living room. The high-tech security monitors showed a clear, safe perimeter. The grass was green, and the air was fresh and sweet. She thought about the black uniform she used to wear every day. She thought about the wine stain and the sister's cruel, mocking laugh. All of that felt like a lifetime ago to her now. She realized that she did not have to be a weapon anymore. She could be a neighbor. She could even be a friend. She picked up a new book and sat in a comfortable chair. The sun warmed her skin through the glass. For the first time, she did not count the exits in the room. She did not look for a hidden weapon. She just breathed in the quiet, safe air. She was home. She looked at the photograph of Leo on the side table. He was smiling. She realized that her life had a purpose beyond the kill. She had saved a future. As the sun climbed higher, she felt the last of the shadows retreat. The Viper Council might come one day, but they would find a woman who was no longer afraid. They would find a woman who had a city and a dragon behind her. But for today, there was only the book and the tea and the silence. She turned the first page, a small smile finally touching her lips. The ghost was gone, and the woman had finally arrived.